This is October 10th, 2018, and I am Sandra Lafke Carlson here in the Heritage Center in Tualatin, Oregon, with Mike Lofton of Digipix. And we are interviewing Loyce Martinazzi today. She's been she grew up in Tualatin on a family farm and co-founded the Historical Society with Karen Lafke Nygaard, and together they wrote the definitive book on Tualatin history, Tualatin from the beginning. So let's start. Loyce, can you just tell us maybe about your life growing up and how you became interested in history?
Well, I grew up, as you say, on a small farm, just west of here, where we are right now. I was born on the Martinazzi farm up on the hill, and then my parents moved over to the Juergens property, my great-grandparents on that side. And so we had a small farm, about finally 50 acres of the Juergens property, and my dad had a little dairy. We milked cows and milked by hand, and we raised strawberries, and I loved it. It was a very nice childhood. Dad was fun to work with, and we were all girls in our family, so we girls had to do the work. We called ourselves arts boys, and so it was kind of fun. Dad was always good-natured and fun to work with, because he would encourage us. We needed to work because he didn't have any sons, and he had this big farm. And so he would encourage us, you know, and he says, "Boy, I don't know how you can do that." We'd get to the end of a strawberry row of hoeing, and he said, "You want to rest?" "Nope." "I don't know how you can do it. You just keep working." So he really encouraged us that way. It was kind of fun. And then I went to Tualatin grade school, and then decided to go to Sherwood High School. We could go to, at that time, Tualatin didn't have a high school, and so we could go to either Tigard or Sherwood or even West Lynn. And the district would just pay the tuition. So I chose to go to Sherwood High School, and after high school, graduating, I married Larry Lee, and he had 40 acres of land that he bought from his dad, and so we lived there and had 5 children.
Okay, and you were inspired, I believe, by your parents in
I was.
history.
In 1959, my mother was a newspaper woman. She was a good journalist, and she worked for at one time the Sherwood Valley News, and then she worked for the Tri-City Times as a reporter for the Tualatin area. And in 1959, it was a centennial of the statehood of Oregon, and the Booster Club in Tualatin asked my mother to write a series of articles on early Tualatin, the early families of Tualatin. And this was right up my dad's alley, because he knew all the old-timers intimately, and he knew all about them. And so together they interviewed the old-timers, and Mom wrote a series of articles with photos in Tualatin Times, Tri-City Times, pardon me. And it was very, very popular. Well, at the time, I was busy with all my 5 little children, and I didn't pay a whole lot of attention. I remember that the Crawfish Festival that year was themed, that's when it got started again, the Crawfish Festival, and it was themed on the centennial year. And so a lot of men grew beards and people dressed in old-fashioned clothes and stuff. And we had a float, a family float we call it, but it was my husband drove a tractor with a wagon, and it was on the Juergens family and the Martinazzis, and there were a lot of Juergens who were on the float. And it started, or the wagon started up at the school and wound down, and people would stand, you know, along. Funny, we didn't have to take any pictures of that, but I can remember that as a fun time. Now, Althea Sweek opened the Sweek House for a tour, but I had my small baby, 6 months old, and I had a migraine headache. So I went home, take care of her, and Larry, my husband, you know, took the kids through the Sweek House.
And your mother was Ann Martinazzi.
My mother was Ann Chapman Martinazzi, yes.
And so she wrote the articles. That was kind of the first time that
Yes.
probably.
Yes, and she wrote them in such an interesting way that people were just very interested in it. And in fact, several other people then tried to write the same kind of history after her, copying her. But yeah, people liked them. It was interesting. Yeah, it was fun.
Then you took some college courses in history.
Well, that's how I got started in being interested in local history. Like I say, I was busy on the farm with all my little kids, 5 kids in 6 years, and I was pretty busy. Cloth diapers, so on. But when I was about 40, I think, I can't remember exactly, my kids were in 4-H and they were showing their animals at the fairs, and I can remember it was at the PI, Pacific International, my kids were showing their animals, and I had signed up for a class at Portland Community College, and it was the history of Western civilization, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was enthralled with it. We had a really good teacher. I got the highest grades in the class, but I was in my 40s, and most of them were kids right out of high school, and they couldn't really care less, but I really cared. It really enthralled me. I had a really good, interesting teacher, and then I became very interested in, the PCC had a lot of files on history, and so I got the censuses for all those years. I could see everybody's, when everybody came. They had all kinds of files and stuff and I would bring these home to my dad and show him. He was real interested. And then Clayton Nyberg said to me, we should reprint those articles of your mother's. And so I had the newspaper articles, and his niece, Ori Nyberg, typed them up and sent them to Washington County, and they printed them in a little book. And so I showed that to my dad, and he was just so thrilled to see that. And that's how I got started to be interested, and I really was. And I wrote several stories, and I took some other classes in creative writing and wrote stories about that. And so that's how I got really interested in Tualatin history, and it just grew because I would talk to people, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And then Karen, whom I knew as Lois Lafke, she was several years older than me, and she went to church here in this building when it was over on Boone's Ferry, and so did I. And she was my Sunday school teacher upstairs. I remember that really well, when I was about 10 years old and she was about 17. And she was also very interested in the music program here, and she was in the choir and sometimes leading the choir. And she asked my sister and I, my older sister and I, to sing a song. And we went up to her house on Boone's Ferry, the old Lafke house, and she played the piano and taught us to sing this song, There's No Place Like Home. And I always sang harmony, even when I was young. And she said, now at the very end, repeat the tag and then just go up real high. And, well, we forgot to do that, but she said maybe another time. and then she went away, and she went to Lewis and Clark College. I went to Sherwood High School, where she had gone to high school. And our paths did not cross again until many years later, maybe in the 70s. She came back to Tualatin and stayed with her parents in the old Lafke house on summers. And then she moved back here to stay, she and her husband. And then we got together. She would be at church, and people would say something about Karen Beach, and I didn't know who that was because I knew her as Lois Lafke. So finally I said, oh, Lois, you're Karen. And we became very close friends, and just we would just go for long walks, and she she remembered me from my childhood and her childhood, and we just really clicked. We were interested in somewhat the same things, and she was really instrumental in my being who I am now. She was very well educated, and I wasn't, but I had a very open mind, and she and I clicked really, really well. And then we would talk about this and that when we were kids, and then I showed her my mother's, stories. And then we began to take long walks. Sometimes we'd walk all the way around Prosperity Park Road, or walk around the river, walk along the hospital's path, and we would talk, and she says, we should start a historical society. I says, oh no, we can't. Yes, she said, we can.
So you didn't think?
I didn't think we could. I didn't have a whole lot of confidence in myself. But she, oh yes, we can. And so we did. And it was amazing because there were still a lot of people living who, you know, were old timers then and now have passed away. And we started it up. We met at what was then the Tualatin Durham Senior Center. Now it's the Juanita Pohl Center. And of course, Juanita and Leonard were charter members of the Historical Society. And my God, we had, you know, a couple of hundred members, and then we put on big programs at the Senior Center once a month when we started out. One was about the history of Tualatin, and people came. We charged $5. I think it was less for if you were a Historical Society member. The place was packed. You'd have 100 people show up. The first one was, I think, about old Tualatin, and people came from the Smith family, came all the way from Grants Pass, and other families to share their stories and their pictures. And we had one on the Native Americans, and we would get speakers from Washington County to come. We had one on Lewis and Clark, and at every one of those meetings, public meetings, we would serve refreshments that were themed to the program we had on. When we gave one about the Tualatin schools, we had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, I think. We had Lewis and Clark, we had dried smelt. I think your father, Herb, brought those, and hazelnuts, things like that. So it was really fun, And
that was in, you started the Historical Society
in 1986. Not 1886.
And so you got the word out by just calling?
Yes, and the local newspaper was really friendly to us, and they really promoted the Historical Society. And there was another paper besides the Tri-City Times or the Tualatin Times. It was called River City Press, and they were members of the Historical Society, and they were very generous to us. Karen and I would write stories in every issue, and I can't remember the year it was now, but the 75th anniversary of the incorporation of Tualatin, we planned a Diamond Jubilee Ball at the Sweetbriar Inn and charged a certain amount. I don't know. We got a one-man band to play, and gosh, it was wonderful. It was a very, as Karen would say, a glitzy event. And she just encouraged me to think beyond my own, self-imposed perimeters. And it was fun. We just worked together. We were just like catalysts, on each other. She told me one time, she respected me, and I really appreciated that. And she said, when you die, a library will have burned down. And well, getting back, we were going to say something about the book. You were going to ask me about that.
Yes.
Anyway, I was saying that when I was going to PCC, I would bring all these things home to my dad. And oh gosh, he was just so thrilled. And he said to me, looked me right in the eye and said, when you write your history, I had no idea. We hadn't started the Historical Society or anything. When you write your history, don't forget the double murder and the blowing up of the dam on the Tualatin River. And one of my saddest regrets in my life is that I didn't at that time immediately research those, because there was all over the newspapers. There were files in the archives, the state and the county archives. My dad would have loved that. That would have just enriched his life. But I didn't do that until after he died, passed away.
But it was a lot of his stories that,
yes,
that got you interested also.
Absolutely, yeah. He would tell me things. He would say that about the double murder. I asked him about it, and he said that the jitney driver, and he told me all about the jitney driver who drove this guy out to Tualatin and who eventually murdered 2 people, the woman in the house that's still standing. And he said that they looked for the extra body for weeks and couldn't find it, and it was all over the newspapers. And he said that he was delivering the newspaper, the afternoon Oregonian, not Oregonian Journal at that time, on his horse, Toby. And he was down by Sagart Street, where Sagart and Boone's Ferry come together, and one of the Geiberger kids came out and said, Art, they found the body, Rissman's body. It's up at Tonquin at the Brewer place. Dad threw him his newspapers and said, deliver these, and he trotted his horse right up there. And he was there when the sheriff came out of the woods vomiting, because the body had been laying there for several weeks, I guess, and it was... So it was really sharp in his mind, and he was like 15 years old. And that would have been forgotten had he not mentioned that to me. So then, after we started the Historical Society, I went around to people and asked them about that. And of course, Jessie Wager, who had been a Seminole, I said, do you remember the double murder? Oh my, yes, she said. I remember the cars going by on... they called it the Dayton Road, Tualatin Sherwood Road, as the sheriffs would go by. And then I asked Cecil Nyberg Dunmeyer, and she said, oh yes, we all locked our houses. We were afraid that the murderer was going to come out and get us too.
And what year was?
In 1916.
1916 is when the murder happened.
And the blowing up of the dam, Dad told me that the dam on the Tualatin River was raised by the Oregon Iron and Steel Company, and they raised it very high so they could float logs down the river from up in Farmington, down the river into the canal, and to Oswego's Oregon Iron and Steel Company, where they would be made into charcoal to smelt the iron ore. And there were two sides to the program. Dad's grandfather, William Jurgens, was highly affected. His farm was flooded. And so he said the farmers sued Oregon Iron and Steel, got together and sued Oregon Iron and Steel. And they won their case against the iron company, but the iron company was rich, the farmers weren't. And they appealed and appealed and appealed and kept it hung up in the courts for 6 years. Oh, really? Actually, we found out later it was longer than 6 years, because there had been many court filings on this, but they were dismissed because the farmers had signed something that they would not complain if the land was flooded, but they had no idea how the land was flooded. And as my father would say, here's another thing. That's exactly what here's another thing. John Sweek, he didn't like John Sweek, and I never knew why. He liked Maria, but John Sweek went around to the farmers and talked them into signing this. Mm-hmm. And I know that because the court records say that Mr. Sweet came around it. Mm-hmm. So that's why, so that kind of puts it all together. Anyway, getting back to my friend Karen, she said we should write a book. Mm-hmm. And of course I was, oh, do you think we can? Yes, we can. Because I had done so much research after that first class at PCC, which I went on to take many more classes. Where was I? Oh, and then my dad said, you know, when you write your history, and I had it in my mind to write a book about Tualatin history.
Oh, you did?
I did. I had it in my mind, and I had kind of forgotten about that until you were asking me some questions. I remember my dad saying, when you write your history. And at one of my classes, a creative writing class, I told the woman I wanted to write a book about the history of Tualatin. But I really had no confidence in myself that I could do that. But Karen said we should write a book, and I was on board with that. I said, yes, I wanted to. And she just inspired me so much. I know she was your aunt, but she was my best friend. And on our walks, we would talk about what to do. I had piles and piles of paper research that I had. I'd been down to the state archives. I'd been to the both Washington County and Oregon City, Clackamas County archives, and gotten information from them in court cases. I didn't know how to find out how to research the court cases. I saw things in the newspapers, but I didn't know. And my daughter, Lila, worked for Judge Levy of the 9th District Court of Appeals. And I met him one time, and I said, you know, how do I find these things out? And it's very easy. He said, you go to the county of origin, where the court case was filed, And in the case of the Oregon Iron and Steel, they would have been filed in Clackamas County because that was the defendant's case. The plaintiffs were from mostly Washington County. And so I went there, looked on the micro will, and there I saw August Krause versus Oregon Iron and Steel. And I thought, oh my God, I've gone to heaven. And so I got the number and went down to the state archives and got a lot of information. I went later and got more information, but that was the start of, that was the opening that I needed. And so Karen and I went down, we checked all these resources, and there was so much out there, so much available. It was like we struck a gold mine. To have the actual transcripts of these court cases. It was just wonderful. And so getting back to all my piles of papers that I had in my desk when I was still on the farm, I didn't know what to do with them. I tried to organize them into, this was railroads, this was bridges, this was Oregon Iron and Steel and so on, but I didn't know what to do with them, but Karen did. And so she organized basically my research and then research that we had done together into chapters.
She had studied journalism in college and then had been a magazine editor.
Correct. Yeah, she graduated from Oregon, from Lewis and Clark with a major in journalism and a minor in music. Mm-hmm. Yes, and so she had the skills to organize that research, and she organized it into chapters, and that was the beginning. And then she moved down to California. Mm-hmm. And remarried. I left the farm, moved to Lake Oswego, and so we would correspond by email. I would write each chapter and send it down to her, and she would edit it, and she knew how to do that. And then she would choose the photos to go with it, and she knew how to write the proper thing about this size and so on. She knew all that stuff, which I had no knowledge of whatsoever. So
you were a good combination.
Oh my gosh, yes, perfect. I had the information, she had the skills to organize that information. Mm-hmm. So together we were just dynamite. I mean, it was so exciting. And so I started out on an electric typewriter and wrote the stories and sent it down to her, and she would copiously edit, and sometimes we had little arguments. In fact, when she would come up here, we would have arguments. But that was good, because I knew a certain thing, but I didn't know what she knew, and I would sometimes feel, no, but she was right. She was right, and I respected her so much. And so then we didn't know what to do with our manuscript as it was going along. And so John Bowles contacted this Davis Fox publishing company, printing company or whatever, in Gresham. And we contracted with them to print the book. They would, after I would send the first chapter down to Karen, she would edit it and put all her markings on it. And so then she would send it back to me, and I would call Davis Fox company, and they would come out to my house and pick up that chapter and format it. Karen did the format. They would print it, and with each chapter, sometimes I'd have several at a time. And that's how the book got finished. And then the Historical Society, of course, we continued the research, because with historians, the more you learn, the more you want to learn. You learn one fact, and it leads you to want, to follow that up and find out more. Finally, Historical Society said, we want our book. Funny, we thought it was our book. But that had to be done, because we would have never finished, because the research continued on and on. But so finally, we got it ready. We sent it to the printer, and we got it printed. And it was...
And that was in what year? Was that 94?
1994.
So you had started working, well, really years before, but then together, you and Karen started working about 1990?
Yes. Yeah.
So you got it printed.
She knew how to, we chose the color, which was a kind of a pale blue with maybe a little green tint to it. We call that our color. And she chose a picture on the front, which I knew exactly where it was, pointing down from the brick store, pointing down Boone's Ferry to Tualatin Road, really. And you could see the first little jail and the first little city hall meeting, building. And called it Tualatin from the beginning. Tualatin ... from the beginning. And it was a proud day. We had our book signing at the Tualatin Library, and oh my gosh, people showed up. We also forgot this thing. We went to some people and said, we need money for the printing up front. Will you buy the book? We charged $20 for it. Will you buy the book? Pay for it ahead of time. And so that's how we got the money to pay the printing bill. I had forgotten that until just now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And see, of course, Karen thought of that. She was just magical with her ideas and so on. And yeah.
Wow.
And of course, I was still working on the farm. She was retired. I was working on the farm, and she says, "You want to work?" I says, "I have to work." But we did work together. She would sometimes come over to my farm store and talk to me when I was working, and
That's amazing. And she would come up maybe twice a year.
Yes.
She'd spend a couple of weeks, and I know the two of you then would just be running around, going to the Historical Society and interviewing people. And,
yes.
But it's amazing that you were able to do that, living far apart.
Right. It was like, together we were like TNT. I mean, she often said, and we talked about it a lot, that neither one of us could have done this alone. And but I credit her. She credited me, but she is more worthy.
Because you had the stories,
Yeah.
you knew the people, and she had experience.
She had the skills
editing and
to pull it
writing.
together. Yeah.
Yeah.
We called ourselves the dynamic duo.
So there's going to be another publishing
Yes.
of the book, kind of an updated version.
Correct.
In the near future.
We ordered 1,000 copies in 1994, and by 2004 we had sold them, and we reprinted. And the bad thing was that this Davis Fox Company had gone out of business, and they did not give us the disc, and we could not find it. So what we did was take our book apart, page by page, and copy it. So some of the photos weren't very clear, and then we added a final chapter to bring us up to date in that last 10 years, because by then the commons had been built and things had changed quite a bit in Tualatin. And so we ordered 1,000 books, and we sold them, and then we were out of books. We've been out for several years, and now we have the 3rd edition coming, and what we have done is one of our volunteers here typed the entire manuscript, typed from the book, and then I went through it and corrected her hundreds of typos and corrected things that needed to be corrected, because like for instance, we had said that the Nyberg house, we had a lot of information on the old Nyberg house, and that the Nyberg ladies still lived in it and so on, but by that time the Nyberg house had burned down and the Nyberg ladies had passed away. So all those things like that needed to be corrected, and things that we had found out that were not true needed to be changed, because history, I like to say, is not an exact science. It's like the layers of an onion. You peel away and you find something else. And so that always, and in this particular issue, we need to do that again. So but I was kind of exhausted from it. I just said, I just cannot go through this again. It's like having another baby. Thank you, no. But I did work on the manuscript and corrected things, but until Ross Ross is just full of wonderful, explosive ideas, and he contacted this boy from the teenager from Tualatin High School, who is kind of our Graham what's his name? Albertino or something like that.
Graham Alberti.
Yeah,
I think.
but he was just really nice about working on it, and we had to find the original pictures. Some of them weren't available because originally we didn't realize how important some of these pictures were, and so we just borrowed them and didn't save them. You know, we gave them back to the owner instead of putting them on our own files, keeping them. Yeah, so we had to do a lot of digging, and he helped a lot with that.
Okay, so in the near future, there will be a new
book, and quite near future, I believe.
Oh, good.
And I praise Ross Baker for that. He pushed ahead with it, where I was exhausted. You know, I had been through the mill with this stuff. I just didn't want to do it any longer. Although I'm still interested in Tualatin history, and I'm still finding out things, you know, that's grunt work, and that's hard work, and I was tired of it. So I really honor Ross Baker for that, doing what it took to bring that forward again, because it is important. Jonathan Crane asked me recently, why is Tualatin history so important to you? And I replied, well, it is my history because my family has lived here since 1869. But the people that move in here have no knowledge of that. So by learning what came before, it helps them establish their roots. And that's my job, and I think we all have a job in life, and that's my job. And I credit my Karen, and then both my mother and my father for that.
Well, that's a wonderful ending, way to end this, unless you have anything else to add.
No, I don't think so.
Well said.
It's the thing I've done with my life, I think. I like to think I've added something to the world in my little way by keeping the history of Tualatin alive.
You have. Yes, thank you, Loyce.
You're welcome.
Thank you for coming today.
You're very welcome.
Telling us the story. So, okay.